By every measure, Brazil should be one of the greatest economic countries in the world. With a population of 217 million people, its sheer size and wealth of natural resources, including the Amazon rainforest, Brazil should be at the top of the world for decades to come. So what's holding them back? In this video, let's talk about the roller coaster ride that is the Brazilian economy, if being a part of BRICS is helping or hurting them, and how a flourishing Brazilian economy impacts the United States and the dollar. But before we talk about today and the future, we first need to talk about how we even got here in the first place. Let's begin in the early 1990s when Brazil was plagued with severe hyperinflation. Its annual inflation rates soared to astronomical levels, exceeding 5,000%, eroding the purchasing power of the population and fueling economic uncertainty. The Brazilian government recognized the urgent need for a solution, which led to the development and implementation of the Plano Real, or Real Plan, a multifaceted economic plan designed to curb inflation, restore fiscal balance, and promote sustainable economic growth. One of the key aspects was the introduction of the real, Brazil's new currency, in 1994, which replaced the heavily devalued Cruzeiro. This currency reform played a crucial role in restoring confidence in the monetary system and providing a stable medium of exchange. It also helped that they established a fixed exchange rate tied to the US dollar. By fixing the exchange rate, the government and central bank aimed to reduce inflation expectations and create stability in the monetary framework. And wouldn't you know it, the plan was working. From the real introduction in 1994 through 1998, Brazil's inflation got as low as 3% in 1998 after sitting around the 5,000% mark just 5 years earlier. Poverty went from hovering around 45% to dropping below 35%. Still not great, but progress was being made. But then everything changed again. In 1999, Brazil removed the currency ties to the US dollar and let the real go to the floating exchange rate system, which allowed the real to be determined by external market forces. Brazil detached the real from the dollar because maintaining the fixed exchange rate system had become increasingly unstable and posed risks to the country's economy. Here are the three main reasons why. The first was economic pressures. As the US dollar strengthened, it put upward pressure on the real, making Brazilian exports less competitive. This had huge effects on the country's trade balance and exporting specific industries. The second reason was external factors outside their control, like the Asian financial crisis. The fixed exchange rate system made it difficult for Brazil to be flexible with these external factors, which exposed the Brazilian economy to increased vulnerability. The third reason was market pressures and speculative attacks. The real became targeted due to concerns about Brazil's economic fundamentals and the sustainability of the fixed exchange rate. Detaching the real from the dollar allowed Brazil to regain control over its monetary policy and exchange rate, reducing the vulnerability to speculative attacks. Inflation went up. Poverty went up. Consumer and international investment confidence went down. A terrible combination. It got so bad that in 2002, the International Monetary Fund had to step in and provide a $30 billion loan to avoid a crisis that Brazil wouldn't have come back from. Between that monetary stimulus and nomination of new president in 2003, Lula da Silva, Brazil was about to experience a decades-long growth that the economy hasn't seen before. Here are some quick-hitting economic numbers in Brazil from 2003 to 2010 under Lula's leadership. Excluding the Eurozone, Brazil's GDP jumped from 13th to 7th during that time, proving they have the ability to become a world power. Unemployment dropped from 12.5% to 8%, with 15 million jobs created during the period through things like infrastructure development. Poverty dropped again from over 35% to under 20% during this period, and the percentage of population classified as middle class increased from 37% in 2003 to 50% in 2010, lifting millions of Brazilians out of poverty. Lula was so impactful that at the end of his presidency in 2010, his government had an approval rating of 80%, and he personally had an astounding approval rating of 87%. That is unheard of. Can you imagine Joe Biden or Donald Trump having an approval rating of 87%? No way. As that was going on, the leading emerging markets from around the world, otherwise known as BRICS, led by Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, had started gaining some momentum. Since their inception, the BRICS countries have seen a meteoric rise in GDP, population, and influence. And when compared against the G7 countries, BRICS has recently just passed them with 31.5% of global GDP. And Brazil took full advantage of their relationship with these countries, specifically specifically China. In the early 2000s, Brazil exported around $3 million a month to China. And in May 2023 alone, Brazil exported $10.5 billion, and the dramatic increase is shown here on the chart. Some of the main resources exported to China have been iron ore, soybeans, and crude petroleum. Brazil also saw the huge trade increase with India and South Africa, as Brazil improved infrastructure around the country to help facilitate its expanding global trade. They also increased their reach to Eurozone, who are now their second largest trade partners behind China. But quickly and quietly, all the economic gain that Brazil saw under Lula's administration was lost, and the country was starting to unravel. Brazil went from near 8% growth in 2010, dropping down to negative growth for consecutive months. A huge part of that was Brazil's political implosion. Lula's predecessor, Dilma Rousseff, who was also the current president of the BRICS Bank, was impeached in 2016 for alleged criminal misconduct of the country's budget and removed from office at the beginning of her second term. A few years later, her replacement, Jair Bolsonaro, was accused of undermining Brazilian democracy and banned from running for office for the next 8 years. So Brazil turned to an old friend and re-elected Lula in 2023 to save the country once again. How specifically could a strong Brazilian economy impact the US economy and the dollar? Before we get into that, this is the first video of a 5-part series where I'm going to be diving deep into the 5 founding BRICS countries and their impact on the US dollar, past, present, and future. So if that interests you and you want to see the other 4 videos, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Earlier this year, Lula and Argentina's president have announced they are spearheading a project to create a South American currency that can be used for, quote, financial and commercial flows, reducing operating costs and our external vulnerability. Lula has been very clear about his country's desire to reduce the need of the US dollar, saying if it depended on me, we would have external commerce always in the same currency of the other countries, so we wouldn't have to depend on the dollar. But there are plenty of skeptics out there who don't think this will come to fruition. Since 1991, when the countries of Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay formed the Mercosur trade bloc, the talk of creating a common local currency has been introduced many times. Emerging markets like Brazil have been hit hard by the strong US dollar, drawing complaints about its dominance in the global financial system. The dollar rallied nearly 8% against a basket of major currencies in 2002, making imports of food and energy more expensive and raising the cost of servicing debt, specifically in dollars. And Brazil, like other emerging countries around the world, are expected to see a growth slowdown according to the World Bank, while only expanding 0.8% in 2023 against their projection of 3%. But they have a huge hill to climb in order to get this new currency in place. One Brazilian economist compared this situation to Europe when they were transitioning to the euro currency by saying, if we compare the Eurozone, discussions over the common currency started back in the 1950s. Then they developed free trade zones, customs agreements, and a common market. Only then did they create a commission able to direct the work together with a common council and a European tribunal. Basically, creating a continental currency doesn't happen overnight. And if it took the Eurozone 40 or 50 years to go from talking about it to implementing it, South America, who's led by Brazil, could be waiting for decades for this to come to fruition and to have a significant impact on the world economy and the dollar. Brazilians have to be hopeful that Lula can transform their country and lead their continent to the brink of world superpower, because under his leadership, they have come oh so close before. While Brazil has the largest Latin American footprint, Mexico has the next largest, and they have a lot to gain by keeping an eye on what Brazil and South America are doing. Could it be beneficial for Mexico to have even closer ties to Brazil and the other BRICS countries? And what would that mean for its relationship with the United States and the dollar? I go over all that in this video here.